Welcome everyone to St. Louis County Library's virtual program, Science in St. Louis, presented by the Academy of Science St. Louis. My name is Sarah and I'm an adult services specialist for St. Louis County Library. And before we get started, I just want to have a few things to note. So tonight's program is in a Zoom webinar format, which means that your camera and microphone are not active. So though we can see and hear you, though you can see and hear us, we can't see and hear you. But we will allow some Q&A at the end using our chat box function. So towards the end of the presentation, I will turn on the chat box and you'll be able to type in your question and comments at that time. We are recording tonight's program and it will be posted to our YouTube channel as well as to the Academy of Science St. Louis's YouTube channel. All right, so I also want to let you know that we have the live transcription, closed captions turned on. If you would like to hide the captions, show the captions, or change the font size on them, you can do that using the CC Live Transcript icon on your Zoom taskbar. And also before we get started, I would like to invite you to check out St. Louis County Library's new YouTube channel and to visit our website, which is www.slcl.org for information regarding the latest reopening phase Summer Reading Club and other upcoming programs. Summer Reading Club just began on June 1st and it runs through August 7th. So it's open to all ages, including adults, and you can earn prizes through reading as well as attending library programs like this one. I want to thank you all for attending Science in St. Louis this evening, and I'd like to welcome Rose Jansen, Director of Public Science Programs and Science Speakers at the Academy of Science St. Louis. She's going to tell you a little bit about the Academy and introduce tonight's speaker. So thanks so much, Rose.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. So we're very pleased to be partnering with St. Louis County Library to bring you tonight's Science in St. Louis seminar. Dr. Luisi Presents, the good, the bad, and the trending health messages in media. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Academy, I'm going to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are. We're an independent science organization supported entirely through community contributions, and at venues throughout the region, we connect science in the community through free and or very low-cost public talks, science seminars and workshops, and trips and tours that feature scientists and engineering professionals of both national and international renown. In addition to advancing the public understanding of science, it's our mission to inspire the next generation of scientists and science advocates, which we do by offering a full array of free and or low-cost opportunities expressly for teens, such as our Teen Science Cafes, STEM Teens Youth Leadership Council, Junior Academy of Science, and the Regional Academy of Science St. Louis Science Fair and its Honors Division. This year, these were all virtual. The Junior Academy is a pre-professional STEM membership organization for students from the full range of academic backgrounds in grades 6 through 12. It offers hands-on opportunities in science, engineering, and medicine. Teens can attend unique behind-the-scenes explorations of leading engineering, technology, and science labs of our region, participate in field opportunities and challenging and engaging science competitions, currently still all offered virtually online. And Junior Academy members make real-world connections by meeting top STEM professionals. You can find more information on the Junior Academy and all of the Academy's community-wide science events and programs by visiting our website at academyofsciencestl.org. You may also visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can sign up on our website to receive Academy e-news or jot your email address down in the online program survey, which will pop up in the chat a couple times this evening during the Q&A session before you leave. I do want to mention one upcoming event before I introduce our speaker this evening. On Thursday night, June 17, also at 7 p.m. via Zoom, we invite you to join us for Advancing Space Exploration using Multi-Robot Systems and Swarms and the solar-powered lunar arc concept with University of Arizona space robotics engineer Jekan Thanga. He and his colleagues are leveraging small teams of university researchers and students to take on ambitious, high-risk, high-reward exploration missions that use multiple spacecrafts or robots working in teams that are analogous to colonies of social insects. He'll be talking about how this approach to the exploration and development of cislunar space and beyond, along with the solar-powered lunar arc concept, to store cryogenically frozen seeds, spores, sperm, and egg samples from 6.7 million Earth species will be pivotal in securing and sustaining human civilization in the centuries to come. Advancing Space Exploration is a partnership presentation of the Academy of Science and the NASA Solar System Ambassadors of Southern Illinois. This event is free and open to the public, and you can register to attend on our website, again, at academyofscience.stl.org/events. With that said, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Monique Luisi. Dr. Luisi is an assistant professor of strategic communication with the Missouri School of Journalism at the University of Missouri-Columbia, as well as an affiliate faculty member of the University School of Health Professions, Master of Public Health. She earned her undergraduate degree in communication studies from the University of Maryland, her master's in communication studies from the University of South Dakota, and her Ph.D. in journalism and mass communications from the University of Kansas. Her research focuses on media messages and audience interpretation of messages related to disease, treatments, and the lives of minority groups. Using both qualitative and quantitative research methods, she has conducted research on topics such as the HPV vaccine on social media, Ebola in US newspapers, mental health in the Black American community, and coming out in sports. Her research has been published in peer-reviewed journals such as Vaccine, the Journal of Research and Science Teaching, Howard Journal of Communication, and the Journal of Homosexuality. Her work has been featured in publications from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and she is a frequent guest panelist on KBIA's Views of the News, a weekly media criticism program. Her work has received top paper, top abstract, and top poster awards from the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication, including the 2014 AEJMC Capital Alpha Carol Burnett Award. Dr. Luisi serves on the board of the university's Teaching for Learning Center. She is an officer for the Minorities and Communication Division of the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication and the Graduate Student Interest Group, and a COVID-19 expert for the National Association of Broadcasters, and a former chair of strategic communication for the Missouri Immunization Coalition. We are very pleased to have her here with us tonight in partnership with the St. Louis County Library and the Zonta Club of St. Louis as part of our Girls Can STEM series for this important look at trending health messages in media. Won't you please join me with some virtual applause in welcoming Dr. Monique Luisi. And Monique, we're going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. It is very, very wonderful to be here today. I'm really excited. And hearing about yourself being read about is always a humbling experience. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. Without further delay, let's share a screen. Go. All right, let's see. Oops. And let's turn the subtitles off. All right. So today I'm going to be talking to you all about messages and social media and how they shape and understand our understanding about health and influence our societies. That's basically the gist, but it's going to be a little bit more than that. So I'm not going to repeat everything that was kindly said about me, but just to give you a little bit of background on my journey, I have always been interested in health, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I didn't always think I was going to study health. So when I went to school at the University of Maryland, I got my bachelor's degree in communication studies. And I will be completely honest, I did not apply for the School of Journalism at the University of Maryland because I was told it was a very competitive program. And I didn't think I was smart enough to get in, only to find out that the communication studies program was also a limited enrollment program, which taught me two lessons. One, read the fine print, and two, do not sell yourself short. And then I moved to South Dakota. And when I moved to South Dakota, I decided, whoa, this is really neat, because I met a lot of Native American persons, a group of people who I didn't have much exposure to before living out in the Midwest. And then I realized that there was so much to do with health and how different groups of people, different generations of people understood health, and that there's many ways to do research. You can do research by tabulating numbers and doing surveys, or you can do research by doing interviews and talking with people face to face. So I decided that I wasn't going to pick one lane of research. I was going to do everything that I can with both survey numbers and also talking with people. So hence the mixed methods research. And that desire for me led me to the University of Kansas, where I got my degree, my PhD in journalism and mass communication. But what the real hook for me going there was that there was this new center called the Center for Excellence in Health Communication to Underserved Populations. And so it really allowed me to do everything that I wanted. And then I ended up at Mizzou. So, and that's my story. So today I'm going to, in this presentation, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in depth about how I got involved in the type of work that I do. I'll give you a little sample of some of the work that I'm doing, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So here's my background story. This is a picture of me and my mommy. My mom, she is wonderful, and she is so important to me, and I say that trying not to tear up. But my mom has suffered with illness and disability for as long as I can remember. She's still with us, but when I was about 4 years old, my mom had 2 massive strokes, and she also soon thereafter had 5 minor strokes. So these strokes left her partially paralyzed on one side of her body. And in addition to that, she had issues with she had to relearn how to write. She had to learn how to feed herself, just things that many of us take for granted. She had to teach herself to do that. And also she was raising me alone. Because of this, my mom and I spent a lot of time together at doctor's appointments. And I am a proud nerd, and I love medical terminologies and things. And it did honestly make the time in the doctor's office easier. But kind of naturally, I became an advocate or a sort of helper for my mom, taking notes, remembering things she couldn't, reminding her things, looking up research about things that the doctor had said to her. But I always had this question in the back of my mind, why do doctors talk about health this way? And what I mean by this way is oftentimes I found that several doctors, not all doctors, would use big words and things that may not have been clear. And I maybe I was thinking, I was a kid, so maybe these words are too big for me, but they were often too big for my mom. And it's not that my mom wasn't uneducated. It was just that there was like this language barrier, though we were all speaking the same language, about what was going on with her health. For example, talks even about diabetes. I knew what diabetes was as a kid. Unfortunately, it does run in my family. And but we don't call it diabetes in my family, we call it sugar. So like my grandfather would say my grandmother had sugar, and I would later learn that means diabetes. All of that to say that how we talk about health is really important. But this isn't just important to me. It has been shown time and time again that how we talk about health is very important to society. So a little bit of a lesson about pain. So here's a little story. There's some researchers at the University of Virginia, and they decided that they wanted to see if their students, in particular their white students, had different understandings about how they believed about pain. Specifically, they wanted to see if their students believe these fantastical false things, these myths about how white people perceive pain and how Black people perceive pain. And so they gave them a quiz, and the quiz asked them several questions. and whether or not they thought these questions were true or false. Some of these questions included Black people's blood coagulates more quickly than whites, and Blacks' nerve endings are less sensitive than whites, and Black couples are significantly more fertile than white couples. And all these are false. But you can see in these boxes a bunch of numbers, but this is the percentage of people who, the medical residents who, and students who felt that these statements were true. And in summary, over half of the participants believed either somewhat or fully that these statements were true. And this is problematic because research subsequently has found that the beliefs in these false myths and how we talk about health and how we understand health can lead to consequences where people are not receiving equitable treatment. So research has shown that Black children, for example, with appendicitis, are less likely to receive pain medications than their white counterparts, and physicians are more likely to underestimate the pain of Black patients. And there's other research that shows that when Black patients complain about pain, they're more likely to be perceived as drug seeking. So this leads to an inequitable health treatment and also more suffering among Black Americans. And this all stems from how we talk about and understand health. So what are the implications for this? Well, in this case, there's a disparity between race and how people are treated. So if you have, for example, a young white woman named Susie, and Susie rides her bike and she experiences a little tumble off her bike, and Susie complains about this, her suffering and her ordeal is more likely to be taken more seriously and receive more adequate health treatment than a Black girl whose name is Susie, who rides a bike and experiences the same tumble. She might be believed that she's suffering, but not to the extent as white Susie. And so these types of things and how we talk about health and how we understand health leads to a variety of disparities and just inequities between sexism and racism and classism, jingoism, xenophobia, ageism, religious intolerance and ableism, and many other just inequitable treatments in health. So it doesn't just end or even start with racism, but the implications for how we understand health are very important to how we treat it and how we are able to help various members of our society. So, as I mentioned before, how we talk about health, if it's not equitable and if it's not based in facts, can lead to a lack of a proper diagnosis. And if we don't have the proper diagnoses, then people can't get the right treatment. And not only does it affect our ability to give people the correct treatment, but it also prevents us from making necessary and important advancements in science and medicine. So in the end, how we talk about health matters. In the end and in the beginning. So if I was asked a while ago, like how would I describe my work? And this is something that many of us many teachers and researchers kind of have to do if we're looking for jobs or talking about audiences, what we do, because it can be really easy to just go on and talk about the different projects I do. But really, my research comes down to two things. And those two things are, I'm really interested in looking at how people talk about disease and how people talk about prevention and treatment. So it's as simple as that. So I'm going to now talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done and some of the work that I will be continuing on. I'm a professor and I really love my job. Being a professor, my job breaks down really into three categories. I'm a teacher, so I do teach classes at the undergraduate and graduate levels about strategic communication research, about theory, ideas about how the world works and how we understand things. And I also teach classes about conflict management. So that's, and I help master students prepare their own thesis documents to help them graduate. And that's really fun because I get to also see other students research. And so being a professor in that way is super rewarding because I get to teach, which I really love. I love my research, don't get me wrong, but I really love seeing other up and coming researchers and up and coming professionals and what they have to contribute to the world. So that's what makes me get up in the morning with a smile on my face every day. In addition to teaching, as I do service like this right here, which is really, it's odd to call it service because I mean, I guess I'm giving service to the community, but I'm also, in a sense, I feel like I get to talk to you about what I'm doing, and I hope that inspires you and gives you some ideas. And in that way, it's a service, but I really just love this. So it doesn't really feel like work at all. But then there's my research, and the research boils back to those two questions that I mentioned before. So how did I get started on my current train of work? Well, when I was a doctoral student at the University of Kansas, I was trying to figure out what I was going to study. And I knew that I wanted to look at health communication, but when you write a dissertation, which is basically your capstone project for trying to graduate, you have to pick a topic, and you have to pick a topic that you can live with very closely for the years that you're writing about the topic. So I came across a headline that talked about HPV vaccination rates being very low, especially in Kansas and Missouri, and cancer experts are alarmed. And the thing about this that really stuck out to me was Kansas was tied for last in terms of HPV vaccination rates among adolescents. And I was kind of stunned and confused about why HPV vaccination rates were low. And I was stunned and confused because the HPV vaccine does a lot to prevent cancer and HPV and genital warts. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. But I thought about it a little bit more and I wasn't so surprised. How we talk about disease has lasting effects. And many of you, whether you know it or not, may be familiar with the findings from this study. This study called Iliolymphoid nodular hyperplasia, nonspecific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in children that was published in the Lancet in 1998 is the infamous study that claimed that that autism was caused by vaccines in children. And this study was conducted by a group of scientists who did faulty research and didn't have an appropriate sample size. And the conclusions were falsified. And eventually, 10 years later, the research was pulled, it was redacted from the journal. But unfortunately, the damage had been done. And this is part of the reason that people have concerns about vaccines and some of the misinformation that has since been shared and believed about vaccines has its origins in this topic. Now, that's not to say that all concerns about vaccines and misinformation about vaccines comes from invalid sources, but this is part of it. That's not to say that concerns about abuses that have happened, real abuses that have happened to different cultural groups don't matter, and that these abuses haven't rightfully affected the relationship that people have between science and medicine and society. But at the same time, this is where part of my work, I find it fascinating and very important, is to get people to understand those different concerns, those concerns that are based in fact, and those concerns that are based in fiction, and to have us come to an understanding. Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that no matter what we feel and what we believe about health, no matter what concerns, no matter what experiences we bring to the table, that we all have the same goal, and that we all want to have healthy, happy societies. So HPV, as I mentioned, the vaccine, the whole issue around the HPV vaccine fascinated me because of its link to cancer. So human papillomavirus is a sexually transmitted disease, and it can cause cancer. And it's not just transmitted sexually. Go to the CDC website to read more about HPV, to learn more about that. But HPV does cause cancer, and in general, cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States after heart disease, and it's an expensive burden, and to the tune of over $158 billion. And this issue is very important to me and to many people in society, because chances are you or someone you loved has experienced either directly or indirectly the effects of cancer. I'm a millennial, and so you can have fun guessing how old I am looking at those age ranges, are particularly vulnerable to the cancer burden. So I was pretty interested in that. So one study I did basically was looking at clinical trials, because clinical trials are really cool, and they're not just always people poking and prodding you, and they can be really useful to scientific developments and research. In fact, it's because of clinical trials that the rates of adolescent cancers have declined drastically between the 1970s and the 2010s. And oftentimes, people participate in clinical trials because they may be in a situation themselves. Now, people do participate because they want to help science and medicine, but yes, there's also the issue of self-benefit, and it might be the best option available for somebody who may be currently experiencing cancer. So with this particular research, line of research, what I looked at are do some types of messages work better for recruiting millennials than the rest of the population? And is there a difference between age and type of messaging? And what got me interested in these questions is just something very simple, thinking about my nieces and nephews, actually, one niece in particular, but with all of my nieces and nephews who range between the ages of, think about this now currently, who range between the ages, I think, of 4 and 21. I've had experiences with them where they, give a medicine, and sometimes you have to bribe a kid. You have to be like, oh, if you take your medicine, you can go play outside, or this will make you feel better. I learned that through observation that say, take this medicine now, and then in big scary voice, usually not the most effective. And it's surprising because adults are just children in bigger size, and we all want to be spoken to in nice ways. It's just that we all have to figure out what type of nice way works with different groups of people to convince them to do the things that we want them to do to better improve their health. So according to the research that me and my team conducted, we found that millennials in particular don't want to feel lost. So what does that mean? That means that the millennial messages for millennials that say, things that I would decide to participate in a clinical trial because people who choose not to are losing time to live, or why would I choose to live less, are more effective than messages saying, do this clinical trial because it'll help save the world or help save others. It doesn't necessarily mean that the stereotypes about millennials only caring about themselves are true, but it does mean in this instance, when it comes to recruiting for clinical trials, that it will be more effective to focus on not something that they can gain, not something that society can gain, but something that they themselves can personally lose if they don't participate in said clinical trials. Also, we wanted to look at not only millennials and what they think then, but how do people change in response to messaging as they age? And in this particular study, we found that as people were increased in age, they became more altruistic. So yes, at a certain point, their mentality towards messaging was, oh, okay, it's more about the community. And that's really kind of cool if you think about that. As we get older, generally we may become more about the community and more about the society. But that does also mean that if we're looking at trying to recruit different age groups and different people to studies, that we have to think about our audience and tailor our messaging accordingly to get the maximum participation, the maximum buy-in from the people that we want. So as I mentioned before, HPV, the big thing that kind of got me on this trajectory, and HPV and cancer. So the HPV vaccine was introduced in 2006. It was approved by the FDA then, and it's the only vaccine that has gone down in recommended doses. So it used to be a 3-dose series, and now it's only a 2-dose series, which is really cool. So, it's approved for use in girls and boys as early as age 9. And it's recommended that kids get the vaccine by age 11 or 12 years. The most recent iteration, of the vaccine is Gardasil 9, which prevents 9 different types of HPV. And these types of HPV are associated with cancers in both males and females, cancers of the mouth and throat, cervical cancer, and several other types of cancers that can be debilitating or lethal. So I was really confused again about the state of Kansas, which I resided in at the time. Kansas, if you look all the way on the right of the screen, you'll see that they were pretty low for adolescent vaccination among females, but also among males. And this was at the time. It has since improved since I've done this research, but at the time, this is what made me go, what's going on here? So I had a thought. I was curious why this is happening, and I had a conversation with a family member about social media and Facebook in particular, about how there's so many different messages on social media about how this vaccine is bad and scary. And I was like, So at the time, I was like, this is cool. Let's look at Facebook, because I'm a millennial and I used to use Facebook a lot. I in full disclosure, I don't use it actively anymore. But when at the time, I couldn't help but notice how the anti-vaccination movement was very outspoken in this particular space. And Facebook is consistently one of the most popular social media platforms among US adults 18 years of age and older. And so in particular for this research, I was interested, because we're talking about teenage vaccinations, I was interested in what the parents were thinking. So that's why I wasn't looking at Snapchat or TikTok or anything like that. Facebook is the space to look for parents and what they're posting and what they're seeing out there. And also, Facebook is unique in the sense that, it was launched before the HPV vaccine was approved by the FDA. So in a way, we kind of have a full history of discussion of HPV vaccine on social media that we haven't had before. And the same can be said actually about the COVID-19 vaccine. So we kind of have a whole chronology about the discussion of the HPV vaccine on social media, which is pretty cool. So I did some research, and first I talked to people, which is which is like the greatest way to do research when you can do it, is talk to people directly. I talked to a number of Kansas parents, and some research was saying that, well, the issue must be that they don't know about the vaccine. No, my participants knew about HPV and what it was, and they at least knew that HPV could cause cervical cancer. They weren't always aware that it could cause other types of cancer, like the cancers of the mouth and throat, but they were aware that and they were also aware that a vaccine existed. And they took the threat of cancer seriously. However, parents who saw more information on social media about the HPV vaccine were significantly more likely to believe that the HPV vaccine could kill their child than those who had not seen information. So correlation does not always mean causation, but it did make me wonder, okay, how do I go a step further and look at what content is out there? Some parents did report that they actually felt this way. Some parents reported that they didn't feel this way, but in the end, the way they answered the questions in the study, it showed that there was a relationship between seeing information about the HPV vaccine on social media and belief that the HPV vaccine could kill their child. So then I decided to do some more research, and I pulled some comments. I pulled 6,506 posts from Facebook and analyzed them for different variables. But one of the things I did was I coded the posts to see whether they talked about the HPV vaccine in a negative way, in a neutral way, or a positive way. And 45% of the posts, of those 6,000 posts, were negative, followed by 29%, which were positive, and 1,645, about 1/4, were neutral. And these posts did have anywhere between 0 to 6,100 comments, over 11,000 reactions, and over 329,000 shares. So these posts could really get some serious attention, some serious traction. So after looking at the posts and their content, I found a couple of key findings, but these really stood out to me. Posts more negative in tone had an increased number of reactions, comments, and shares. And the saying, bad news travels fast, good news travels fast, I don't know what it is originally, but in this instance, the bad news really did travel fast. And it's hard sometimes to look away from things and to ignore bad news, because it does really catch people's attention. When everything's going well, it's kind of a slow day. And when everything is going, it has a tendency to get people's attention. But more disturbing was that not only did these particular posts get more attention, but they had momentum. So they were more likely to be shared over time, particularly posts that had barriers to HPV vaccination or cues to avoid vaccination. And those posts that were negative towards the HPV vaccine had momentum. So for this particular study, I also wanted to look at what the most engaging post was. It's like, how much further can we delve into this data to see what's going on? And this is part of what gives us answers to some of our questions about why we talk about and why we understand health and treatments and prevention the way we do. But I digress. In this study, this was the most engaging post. It's a post from a Facebook group called Cancer Truth, in which it says that Merck and the CDC have determined that 1 out of every 912 who received Gardasil in a large study died. Yet the cervical cancer death rate is only 1 out of every 40,000 women per year. In other words, girls are better off not taking the shot because Gardasil kills girls in greater numbers than does the disease it purports to treat. And then it has picture below of young girls who supposedly died because of Gardasil. And this is full of misinformation from start to finish, and it falsely implicates without evidence and citations about negative things about the HPV vaccine. Nonetheless, despite it being false and misinformation, this post did, at the time of it being captured, gathered over 6,100 comments, 11,000 reactions, and was shared over 329,000 times. So yes, I did a little bit more research, and this is where this is the last thing I'll talk about in terms of this research with the HPV vaccine. I noticed that one way that many people talk about health and disease is we talk about the disease being scary. At least we talk about that in science. We talk about, okay, the disease is bad, the treatment is good, the end. Well, that's not how people always see it. The disease is bad, but is it really that bad? Sometimes people ask, and people are like, is the treatment really that good? So I wanted to kind of flip the script and see how people were talking about HPV vaccine as a risk. Therefore, I looked at these posts again to see if the posts were amplifying the perceived risk of the HPV vaccine. So basically, I was trying to see, are they saying the HPV vaccine is scary? Not just bad, but it's also scary. And I found in the end that most of the posts, the largest not the largest cohort of posts, but most posts were doing neither. Most posts in this sample were neither accentuating the risk of HPV vaccine, but they weren't attenuating to it either. But still, 39.5% of the posts in the sample were amplifying the risk of the HPV vaccine, and only 2%, mostly the CDC, it would turn out, were attenuating the risk. And those posts that had hyperlinks and negative tone towards the HPV vaccine and HPV vaccine risk amplifying messages received much greater comments and shares and reactions. So the ones with the alarm bells, those were the ones that were getting the most attention. And similarly, those posts had momentum. So this is not to say, sometimes when people might see this research, they might say, oh, are you saying social media is the big bad and that we should just all cancel our Facebook accounts and call it a day? No, that's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying, though, is that social media can do good, but we have to think about the good and the harm it could do, and the right way, and not only the right way, but the best ways to use social media. Because at the end of the day, it's like a tool. Sometimes it's better to text somebody, sometimes it's better to call somebody on the phone. Sometimes social media can be great, and other times it can be harmful. It's just another means for communicating. So in the end, my research with this particular vein of research supports that social media is really good for alerting us to the concerns of the public. We can use it to really see what people are thinking about, what people might want to talk about, and what issues are on people's radar. And it can help us establish connections with communities. Fortunately, social media has been a wonderful tool for connecting people who would otherwise not be able to access, especially if you live in rural communities, or if you have an experience with a disease that may be rarer. You can connect with other people and crowdsource resources. So that's great. And it can also promote awareness and start a conversation. However, social media probably is not the best forum for fighting people and trying to make people feel one way or the other about vaccines. There's other tools for that, like face-to-face communication, or maybe having a social media ad that advertises coming to Science in St. Louis online. So thank you for being here today, and then having this discussion and going out and talking with your family members and your loved ones and your friends. So communication, as you probably all know, is very dynamic, whether you're doing it face to face, online, on the phone, whatever. It involves a bunch of different processes, and some things are going to work differently than others, and some choices that we make on how to communicate and what to communicate will be very important to effectively communicating and getting our message across to the various audiences that we have. So this also extends into my work with COVID-19, and I kind of have several things that I'm working on right now, and if you ever want to reach out to me and talk about it, that's cool. With COVID-19, the research I have in progress, one project that I've been really happy to be able to do is I've been working with the National Association of Broadcasters to figure out what news media audiences want to hear in news stories about COVID-19. Now, this is it has been a rapidly changing situation, and people want information and they want it quickly. But we also have to realize that the type of information that's received can influence decision making. So, for example, we found that while our participants wanted to know more about side effects, we found that there were relationships between vaccine hesitancy and news reports that focused heavily on side effects. So then a question became for the media. We have this responsibility to be honest and transparent about the vaccine, but how much is too much emphasis in when we talk about side effects, because we don't want to scare people away from getting the vaccine. And we currently see that there are issues with people not getting the vaccine or getting one dose and not the second dose, and so on and so forth. I'm also working with the American College Health Association on a couple of projects related to understanding college students and their needs and barriers and concerns about the COVID-19 vaccine with college, well, yeah, among colleges. So, many schools are in summer break right now, but as we prepare to enter the fall and think about that, many people and many universities are thinking about, okay, what is going to be our protocol? What is going to be our messaging? How do we get people to talk about I keep saying HPV, one track mind, the COVID-19 vaccine, and how do we get people to get the vaccine, and what happens when if people choose not to get the vaccine because they're either allergic to it or they just choose not to. How do we all coexist in society together to make ourselves physically and mentally healthy? These are all things that we have to think about, and I have the privilege and part of the responsibility in working on. For my own research, unaffiliated with other organizations, I'm looking at how the pandemic is changing and will change us, and how we talk about the disease and vaccines. This is yet again another vaccine that comes after many of the social media platforms that are out here today. And there's a wonderful opportunity to look at how people are talking about it on social media and off social media. These instances, this pandemic is historical. We are living history, and we are also living in a time where we have improved with social justice in many ways, but there's still a long way to go. So it's just really interesting to see how different people perceive disease. I'll leave this part with this. I was thinking about something my grandfather-in-law said the other day. He just turned, on May 31st, he just turned 87, and he got the COVID-19 vaccine. And he was saying that, he was so thankful that he got the COVID-19 vaccine and that there was a vaccine available, because he remembers polio, and he remembers his friends and his friends' parents, and talking about being put in iron lungs, like these machines that had to help people breathe, and people dying around him like flies. That's in his own words, because of polio. And so it's just kind of a miracle that we have this vaccine now. Now, it's interesting because at the same time, on the same visit, I out there to my in-laws, I also talked to my sister-in-law, who's not too much older than me. And she was talking about how she's concerned about the vaccine, and she doesn't know if she will get it for herself or her children, because she wants to find more natural ways of protecting herself against COVID-19. And she wants to learn more. And she's nervous because of the things that have happened in history against certain groups, and whether or not the vaccine is safe. And these are all, members of my same family and generations apart, who have very different perspectives on what health is and what's a miracle and what's scary. Maybe it's both. At least that's what people think. And if that's what people think, understanding that can be the keys to promoting better societies and healthier societies. So, in the beginning and in the end, how we talk about health matters. It matters so much because we are constantly, with our communications, shaping how we think about disease. We are shaping our understanding and our actions towards prevention and treatment. This in turn affects policy and rules and mandates for our health and equitable treatment, and our struggle against prejudice and discrimination. And in turn, this affects the public, whether it's just in our neighborhoods, in our counties, in the state of Missouri, in the United States, and abroad. At the end of the day, it affects all of us, and it affects you. And I'm glad that I can work with science, and you can STEM too. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really pertinent presentation, something that's definitely on our minds. I have opened the chat box, so if anyone has any questions for our presenter tonight, please go ahead and enter those in the chat box. The chat icon looks like a little speech bubble with the word chat underneath it, and you may need to wiggle your mouse or tap lightly on your screen to get that bar with the icons to appear. But while we're waiting for some questions to come in, maybe I'll ask a question. Well, actually, so the library just did a racial justice or racial equity and social justice challenge in May, and it was focused on racism as a health crisis. And we did it in partnership with the YWCA. And they also referenced that that study that you did about the medical students and their beliefs about African Americans. And that was really eye-opening for me personally, because I knew that there were health disparities, but I guess I had assumed that they were like systemic in nature and about like access to healthcare and not really about like explicit beliefs. So where do you think that, because you would think that people who are going into medicine would have pretty pretty good health information. Where do you think that these medical students are getting this messaging that makes them have these beliefs about their Black patients?
That's a really big question. There are a variety of places that people may have gotten this information from or these beliefs. It could just be, that they had heard it somewhere. Actually, I had heard this one too, and I'm not ashamed to admit I believed it before when I was younger. That Black people were stronger, and in some ways, I was like, oh, that's not, now that I look back on it, it's like, that's kind of offensive to white people too, in some ways, but it kind of cuts both ways, this one. And so it can just be a common misperception or a common belief that we believe in so long that we don't even challenge it. So it's important to not only take those big, obvious, glaring disparities and those glaring stereotypes, but also challenge those stereotypes that we might perceive to be less harmful or not even harmful at all, to really just understand at the end of the day that humans are pretty biologically similar, and these types of things should be discussed. So medicine is so much more than just biological science and the science that happens in laboratories, but it's also social science and how we talk and how we understand and how we think.
All right, so we have a few questions in the chat box. Let's see here. Okay. Are there any trends around age groups are there particular age groups that are more likely to spread misinformation or believe misinformation on social media?
That's a really good question. In part, this is going to depend on what social media platform that we're talking about. And this is the tricky thing about social media and social media research. Social media is not just one thing. So our people, it's probably more likely, and I would need to do more specific work to give you specific trends, but I could tell you that parents of adolescents are going to be the Facebook users, right? And then these are not the people who are going to be using TikTok and Snapchat. And so if we're talking about misinformation spread, the next question I would ask is, among which group are we worried about here? Because I'm more worried about, say, my younger nieces and nephews seeing misinformation on TikTok or Snapchat than I would be worrying about them on Facebook, because they're like, oh, Facebook, my parents are on that, I'm not paying attention to that as much. So that's a really good question, and I think that that's something that research needs to really acknowledge and really broadcast more, that the type of information that is seen is very the groups who are seeing different information look very different depending on where we're sourcing this information from.
Mm-hmm. And you did bring up different platforms. Is there a particular social media platform that has more misinformation than the others, or is more difficult to verify?
I don't know specifically if there are more pieces of misinformation to verify. I think that because social media platforms, well, also I want to stress that social media is not the big bad. That's not what I'm saying here, because they have spent millions of billions of dollars to combat misinformation, while also at the same time there's this, because this is the United States, there are also issues with freedoms of speech. So that's a delicate battle. But there are definitely ways that you can check for misinformation. You want to, it takes a little bit more steps, but sometimes you need to look at the sources. You need to look at the account where the information is coming from. And it can also just be helpful to not share anything that is, don't share something that you wouldn't share with a kid or with your grandparent, in the same way, because even if it looks exciting and it looks cool, and some people are just sharing it because they're like, oh, look at this thing was, I just can't believe somebody said it. If you have like a public profile, or things can be shared through public means, then you might be inadvertently contributing to some of that spread of misinformation. So that's a really good question. And I wish I had more answers.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Oh, we have a question about confirmation bias. Do you notice confirmation? How does the role of confirmation bias basically play into misinformation about, or even, I guess, good information about health messaging on social media, both from an anti and pro-vaccine sentiment?
It's very easy, especially with social media platforms. So this kind of gets into how social media platforms work. Because content is tailored and curated many times, and algorithms will find that we are connecting with people and sharing information with people who are like-minded and similar. So there is a danger that if you, for better and for worse, that if you have specific opinions about things, or specific ideas with regard to vaccines, or any other issue, that you're going to be in an echo chamber where and that is to say that you're going to just hear the opinions you want to hear being bounced back to you, which is why I think while social media is great for many things, it's important to kind of get outside of your circle, and you can do that by talking to a doctor or a real human being outside of the computer box. Excuse me, that's my grandfather clock that's ringing right there. But yes, all that to say that when you look at comments on social media, you can definitely see people might be arguing and mudslinging one way or the other. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to get to a common goal of at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who wins or loses a fight on social media. What matters is if we're all moving together in a direction to protecting our health. And sometimes that comes from understanding what somebody else is thinking, their experiences, their history, their backgrounds. And social media is not going to solve that, and staying in your own circle, whether it's on social media or not, is not going to solve that. So it's important to get out there, to talk to people, to be empathetic and compassionate towards that understanding.
All right, I don't think we've had any new questions, so I'll actually go back to our very first question, which seemed like kind of a wrap-up one, which is basically, if you had one message for us to take away to act on in our lives, what would that message be?
I saw that question and I was like, oh, thinking about that one. I would say that the thing I would want people to take away is to be kind and remember your humanity, remember our humanity. And what I mean by that specifically is that these issues are hard, and health is a very dynamic, it's an ever-changing process. I mean, once upon a time, we believed that if you were sick, you had bad blood, and then you cut your arm and you bleed out, and then that gets rid of the bad stuff that's in your blood and makes you feel better. And that was the best science we were operating with at the time. We've come so far, and yet we have so far to go. And it's important because when we invest in science, And when we trust science and trust research, we are really making a big, big commitment. We are saying that you're saying, I trust you. I trust all the work that you've done, the work that's come before you, that I'm going to put this thing in my body or do this thing that you tell me to do, and hope and believe that it will give me a healthy outcome. And unfortunately, science has not always come through. There have been, whether it was like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments or the Havasupai abuses with the genetic testing and so on, or experiments done on Jewish persons during and others during the Holocaust. People have been hurt throughout history. So it's not only misinformation. Misinformation is a part of it, but it's a whole system. It's a whole process. And so by remembering humanity and remembering to be empathetic and trying to understand where people are coming from, we can start there and begin to understand what people's hesitations, concerns, and desires would be. And that is what can help us be better scientists, researchers, and humans to help all of us be healthier.
Well, that's a really good message to end on and take away with. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Luisi, for joining us tonight. I don't think we have any more questions, so we can probably wrap it up there. We did drop some information into the chat box. If you have a chance, please fill out that survey for the Academy of Science St. Louis. The information that you give them helps us plan more programs like this one. I also dropped some information into the chat box about our current reopening phase at the library summer reading club, which, like, as I said, is for adults, not just for children too, and some information about our YouTube channel, because we have recorded this program tonight. So I see several questions about, or several comments thanking you. So thank you so much. At this time, we will end the program. We'll all turn our cameras off, but I will leave the program running for just a few more minutes in case you want to click any of those links or copy anything out of the chat box. So thank you for joining us at Science in St. Louis, and we will see you next month. Thank you, Dr. Luisi.